Imagine waking up tomorrow and nothing has changed. Same habits, same excuses, same life. Now imagine that happening again and again and again for the next 5 years. That's not a possibility. That's the path you're currently on. But here's the scary part. You don't need 5 years to fix it. You need one day. One day of brutal honesty. One day of cutting distractions. One day of doing what you've been avoiding. The question is, are you actually ready to do it? Or are you just going to watch this and move on? Section 1. The trap nobody warned you about. You were told you were special, but now you feel stuck while everyone else is passing you by. That gifted label wasn't a head start. It was a psychological trap that made you terrified of being mediocre. To actually succeed, you have to kill your ego and learn how to work. Let that sit for a second, because here's what that looks like in real life. You open your laptop. There's something important you need to do, something that has been sitting on your mental to-do list for weeks, maybe months. You know it matters. You know it would change things. And yet, somehow, you end up doing something else. Checking something, scrolling something, reorganizing your desk, or making another cup of coffee. Hours pass. Night comes. You feel a familiar low hum of guilt, and you tell yourself tomorrow will be different. It won't be, not unless something actually changes today. And here's where society has gotten this completely wrong. The world looks at a person like you, intelligent, aware, capable, and assumes the problem is laziness or weakness or a lack of discipline. Productivity culture sells you journals and morning routines and cold plunges as if the issue is that you haven't suffered enough in the right order yet. But that's not what's happening inside you, not even close. The real problem is far more interesting and far more fixable, but only if you're willing to stop performing self-improvement and start doing something far more uncomfortable, telling the truth. Section 2. What procrastination actually is. Let's talk about what's really going on, because the stereotype is almost entirely wrong. The common assumption is that procrastinators are people who don't care, people who are lazy, unfocused, indifferent to their own future. Pop psychology turns it into a time management problem. You just need a better system, they say, a new app, a Pomodoro timer, a color-coded calendar. But Dr. Fuchsia Saros at Durham University and Dr. Timothy Pico at Carleton University spent years studying procrastination and arrived at something far more revealing. Procrastination is not a time management problem. It is an emotion regulation problem. People don't avoid tasks because they don't care about time. They avoid tasks because of how those tasks make them feel: anxious, incompetent, overwhelmed, or exposed. Think about what that actually means. The person sitting there paralyzed in front of their laptop isn't lazy. They're often the most emotionally sensitive person in the room. They're someone who cares so deeply about the outcome that beginning feels like a threat. Because beginning means risking failure. And for someone who was told their whole life that they were smart, that their identity was built around being capable, failure doesn't just mean a bad result. It means they were wrong about who they are. That's not laziness. That's fear wearing a very convincing disguise. And here's where it gets psychologically precise. The brain has a structure called the amygdala, your internal threat detector. For most tasks, it stays quiet. But for tasks that carry emotional weight, the business idea, the difficult conversation, the creative project that actually means something to you, the amygdala fires. It sends a signal that says danger. And your brain, wired for survival, not success, responds by steering you towards something that feels safer, something easier, something now. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio spent decades studying the relationship between emotion and decision-making, and what he found overturns almost everything we assume about rational behavior. We don't make decisions with logic first and emotion second. We make them with emotion first. Logic comes in afterward, usually to justify what we've already decided to do or avoid.
So when you tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, that's not a rational calculation. That's an emotional response that your brain has helpfully wrapped in reasonable-sounding language. Section 3. The one-day framework and why it works. Now here's where this becomes actionable, because understanding the psychology is not enough. Understanding without movement is just sophisticated procrastination. The one-day premise is not a motivational trick. It's a structural insight borrowed from the way high-performance systems actually work. Elon Musk has spoken about first principles thinking, the idea of stripping a problem down to its foundational truths and rebuilding from there, rather than reasoning by analogy or following conventional assumptions. Most people never apply this to their own lives. They keep inheriting the structure of their days without ever questioning whether that structure is actually serving them. One day of first principles living asks a simple but devastating question. If you had to rebuild your life from scratch today, if nothing carried over from yesterday's habits, yesterday's distractions, yesterday's identity, what would you actually choose to do? The answer is almost always simpler than you think, and almost always the exact thing you've been avoiding. Abraham Lincoln, one of the most psychologically burdened leaders in American history, governed through crippling self-doubt and depression, what he called the hypo. What kept him functional wasn't optimism, it wasn't confidence, it was clarity. He had a remarkable ability to strip situations down to their moral and practical essentials and act from there, even when everything around him was chaos. He once wrote that he had a way of slowly reducing things to their simplest parts until they were clear in his mind. That kind of clarity is available to you, but it requires something most people actively avoid: silence, stillness, honest accounting. Section 4. The brutal inventory. Here is what the one day actually looks like. Not as a schedule, not as a productivity hack, as an honest reckoning. The morning does not begin with your phone. It begins with a question. What is the one thing I have been avoiding that if I did it would change the most? Not 10 things, not a vision board, one thing. The thing that makes a small, uncomfortable feeling rise in your chest when you think about it. That feeling is information. That's the amygdala marking something as significant. And the fact that it makes you uncomfortable is not a reason to avoid it. It is precisely the reason to move toward it.
Sit with that. Write it down on paper, not a screen. There was research from the University of California suggesting that handwriting engages the brain differently from typing, more slowly, more reflectively, more honestly. You're not drafting an email, you're making a confession to yourself. Then do something that sounds almost offensively simple. Spend the first hour of the day doing only that thing. Not preparing to do it, not researching it, not telling someone you're going to do it, doing it. Even badly, even incompletely. The doing matters more than the quality of the output right now, because what you are actually doing in that hour is rewriting the neural story your brain has been telling about that task. You are proving to your amygdala that it is survivable, that beginning does not destroy you. Franz Kafka worked a full job at an insurance company during the day and wrote at night, often just for an hour or two, producing some of the most profound literature of the 20th century. He didn't wait for the perfect conditions. He didn't wait to feel like it. He showed up to the page in the small hours and let the work be imperfect and strange and entirely his own. That's the model. Not inspiration, presence. Section 5. The self-reflection moment. I want to pause here and ask you something, gently, without judgment. When you think about the thing you've been avoiding, the project, the conversation, the change, what is the story you've been telling yourself about why you haven't started? Take a moment with that, not to criticize yourself, genuinely to listen, because there's usually a story, and the story is almost always protecting something. Sometimes it's protecting you from disappointment. If you never fully try, you never fully fail. Sometimes it's protecting an identity, the person who has potential, the person who is planning, the person who is almost ready. And sometimes it's protecting a relationship with someone who might not understand the new version of you that this change requires you to become. None of these are signs that something is broken in you. They are signs that you are human and that the thing you want actually matters to you deeply. You don't anxiously avoid things that are meaningless. You avoid things that are loaded with meaning. The question worth sitting with is this: is the story you're telling yourself keeping you safe, or is it keeping you small? Those are not the same thing, and only you know the honest answer. Section 6. Reframing the whole thing. Here's the reframe that changes everything. What if procrastination in a driven, sensitive, intelligent mind is not a character flaw? What if it is an unmanaged depth? The person who overthinks, who delays, who circles the same decision 17 times, they are often the same person who, once they begin, goes further than anyone expected. They see angles others miss. They care about the work in ways that cannot be faked. The paralysis was not proof of weakness. It was the excess weight of caring too much, aimed at the wrong moment in the process. Self-awareness is not the same as self-improvement. Self-awareness says you are broken and need to be fixed. Self-awareness says you are a particular kind of person with particular patterns, and those patterns have logic. And once you understand the logic, you can work with yourself instead of constantly against yourself. The goal is not to become someone who never hesitates. The goal is to become someone who hesitates briefly, understands why, and moves anyway. That gap between the fear and the action is where character is actually built, not in the absence of resistance, in the crossing of it. Closing. So here's the simple truth that I want you to carry with you. You don't have a discipline problem. You have an honesty problem. Not honesty with others, honesty with yourself, about what you want, about what you're afraid of, about what it would cost you to actually show up fully for the life you keep saying you want. One day of that kind of honesty is worth more than 5 years of productivity systems, motivation videos, and self-help books that tell you what you already know. You know what needs to change. You've known for a while. The only question that has ever mattered is whether today is the day you decide that knowing is no longer enough. If something in this video made you pause, if a thought surfaced that you weren't expecting, I'd encourage you not to move past it too quickly. There's something there worth looking at. And the next video picks up exactly where this one leaves off, exploring why the most self-aware people are often the most stuck, and what it actually takes to close that gap between understanding yourself and changing your life. Don't scroll past that feeling. That's where the real work begins.